And good evening and welcome to City Focus. And I'm Marty Olsen, your host. And tonight I am genuinely excited about my program and the guest we have for you. I have a retired head football coach at the United States Coast Guard Academy, Bill George, but he's here more in the capacity as an author. And I've had the opportunity to sit down and read his work, and I'm excited to get your take on your book and the messages, and I just think it's marvelous. And I want to thank you for carving out an hour to share with us here on the air.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to talk about a book you've written. That's for sure.
Yeah, I read prior to digging into the book that this was you worked with Vicki Fulkerson with the Day, and that you were working on this for the better part of a decade. I mean, this just didn't pop out of your head overnight.
No, I started writing in the end of my career, my coaching career, but you really can't write when you're working full-time or coaching football. And I had a book, and I had Vicki, I knew, to look at it and look over it, and she liked it. But I really restarted it when I retired and COVID came about, maybe that winter, the winter of 2020, just as COVID was coming underway. And that's when I really took the time to rewrite it. So I did have it put together in my later years of coaching, 16, 17, 18, taking those notes, but then I really put it together 2020. I decided to throw away my first copies and just start all over.
Really? So. Now, what motivated you to do this? I mean, you've got, from my take, you've been very personal in this book. You've got a lot of your family and family history. You've also integrated a little bit of your coaching in the Coast Guard and Coast Guard football. But I find each aspect of things fascinating for many different reasons. Reading it, but why did you decide I'm going to do this? Well, and stick to it.
I always had an interest in writing all the way back from my freshman year of college, and then you go on with your life and you work and you read, and I started writing a little book about football, but the circumstances changed for me. Suddenly, I had I think back, I had a father who was on our couch dying in hospice care. They'd cut out a lot of his meds, so his mind was opening up. And my wife and I adopted very late in life, and suddenly we have a 4-year-old daughter, and I'm coach of the academy, so I centered it around one game. I revolved not only around that one football game where I reflect on all the good of the Coast Guard Academy, but then also our home life, taking care of someone who's on our couch. And he starts reflecting on his childhood and the people he grew up with and how they were affected at a very young age by World War II. So I go a little bit back and forth, and hopefully I pulled it off.
Well, I think you did a marvelous job. I mean, it was a good read. It was interesting. Like I say, on many different levels. Also, looking inwardly at my own existence in life, and although I didn't play college football, I did play high school football. So I've got a fondness for the gridiron. So, getting your thoughts, as a coach, and I think that there's an element of vulnerability in what you've outlined here. I mean, you've got some, I think, rather personal things there, especially about your family and your dad and your wife and your daughter and the whole kit and caboodle. And I give you high marks for opening up like that.
Well, one of the John Odell, a retired captain, was an attorney who read one of the early manuscripts, and he said to me, you hung yourself out there, you've made yourself an anti-hero of your own memoir. And I do come off like I thought I was, a selfish football coach, while my wife is taking care of my dying father, and we had home care workers and hospice people in the house. And my daughter, she thinks of him as her brother. He moved in with us when she was just 6 months old. And I did think I was a little bit of a self-centered football coach and have those goals where the rest of the world is revolving around. And as my father, who did a lot of good things in his life, I start questioning, what have I done for the world? Am I only concerned about football? So that becomes that aspect of it.
Well, I think that you weren't too hard on yourself. I mean, you know, football coach was your job. I mean, that was a choice that you made. I mean, you didn't have to be a football coach, and you know, that goes with the territory with those who are around you. That's what a football coach has to do. Yeah. I mean, it's not an 8 to 5 job.
It's not, and I will say that I had the greatest job in the world, to be the head football coach at the United States Coast Guard Academy for 21 years. I have to say it's got to be the luckiest guy on the face of the earth, because it was a tremendous job to be around those people at the Coast Guard Academy for all that time. It's just a luckiness for my family, for me, for everything. So, you know, that was an easy place to coach football.
Yeah, and I've had the honor and privilege of knowing some of the other coaches and other sports at the academy. We were talking before we came on the air. Don Pinney, whose eldest son is a classmate of mine, and one of his other offspring was a classmate of my younger brother's. Pete Barry, who sat where you are, was a terrific guest, and he's a neat guy. And Jazz has been in here, and I just think it's terrific how accessible the folks at the Academy are to come on here on a public access program and share their thoughts.
Yeah, and geez, you had everybody but me. Thank God I wrote a book. I finally got on. No.
We'll have you back. I got a feeling we can. You know, we'll figure out where the holes are in our discussion, and we'll fill them at the next time you come in.
And all those people you mentioned are dear friends. So you know, it's a tremendous place. You know, I said, you know, if God said you got 30 seconds left to live, and you know, you need to pick somebody to take care of your children, you could shut your eyes and put your hand out at the Coast Guard Academy, and the next person who crossed your finger you'd be fine. That's the kind of people that were there. So I was lucky, you know, to be around those people for 21 years.
Yeah, well, I think all the academies are special, and I mean, since 2001, I've been at least one football game a year at West Point. I love going there. To me, it just, and I love history, and the place just oozes history, and I just, makes me proud to be an American when I get on that campus. I've been to Annapolis once. I went for a game, and not nearly as many Coast Guard games, I have to admit. I think I was at the St. Lawrence game that you outlined in the book, though. One of the things I noted watching that game was the major difference in the size of the linemen. Their linemen were tipping at 300. I don't think your guys are quite that big.
No, I think that year we had, and I think I put it in the book, we had the smallest starting offensive lineman in all of college football, and he was under 200 pounds, our center, Kevin Pastiglione. So there's a size difference. The good far outweigh the challenges at a place like the Coast Guard Academy. So you've got some challenges, but the good outweigh them. The good things you can draw from at a place like Coast Guard, you know, far outweigh those challenges.
Well, the players and the students, I mean, they're all top shelf people. I mean, they're all, you know, high integrity, high quality, and smart as a whip. And one of the things I love about watching any of the academies is that they're playing from whistle to whistle, and whether you're winning or losing, they go at it full tilt, right to the last whistle.
They go 100 miles an hour. That's the nature, you know, I put in the book, that's the persona. It's how their hearts beat at the academy. They don't slow down. They go all out all the time. And if you stay positive, they'll keep going strong. You know, I learned that early on. You had to stay positive with the kids, and you can lose a heartbreaker on Saturday, but if you stay positive, by Tuesday's practice, they're ready to play for the Super Bowl all over again. So.
Well, how did, you know, within the context of your book, because upstate New York, Myers, Glens Falls come to mind, Syrian Hill, and when I reflect on those images at that time, I don't think many Americans were traipsing around very much. I mean, you were born in a particular place, wherever it may be, here in London or southeastern Connecticut or upstate New York, and you really didn't venture too far from where you grew up. You know, I think a lot of this has transpired post World War II with cars and the highway system and suburbs, but so to be in your tight-knit ethnic neighborhood growing up, and I was fascinated by having that aspect of the book and learning about that and the intricacies and the ins and outs of your family and neighborhood.
Well, I came, with the subtitle, Coast Guard Academy Coach recounts the unfulfilled lives of World War II, because these people immigrated to this country. They had children. They lived on a little tiny hamlet, Myers, New York. They worked right there at the salt plant. Many of them, and then as they grow up, and that's what I went through, the relationships as they grew up, many of them, the first time they even left their own little town was to go to World War II. And that's what I wanted to capture. The different relationships of the people as they're growing up, what their dreams were, what challenges they faced. And then the first time they even left really was to go to World War II, these young people. And so that's what I wanted to develop. What were their dreams? Many had their dreams shortened. Some came back and had their dreams fulfilled. And that's what I wanted to characterize in this book, that people have short lives and tragic lives. We see that every day. And in this case, these people had this short, tiny life in this little immigrant village of Myers, New York, and then suddenly they're thrust into the world limelight of the front lines, of the world in war.
And how that impacts folks. I mean, my father and my uncle both fought in World War II. My father was in the South Pacific, and my uncle was in Europe. I don't recall ever having a conversation with my uncle about World War II. And my dad was not regular dinner table conversation. It would come up occasionally. He'd have guests that he served with periodically. Had a buddy of his who lived in New Britain. But it was not, like I said, it was not prime time talk.
No, one of the people in my book is Gus Isaacs, who turned 100 this past August.
Right.
He's got the Bronze Star at Anzio, Purple Heart at Battle of Kalmar Pocket, I think, if I have that right, the two bases. He didn't talk much about it till after the movie Saving Private Ryan came out.
Okay.
And him being that age, so that opened him up a little. So I had some topic notes there. And I mentioned that I did go back and talk to one of the brothers of one of the other people, and he didn't want to talk about it to me, but he gave me enough information about his brother, who was the main character. But people didn't talk about it as much. In fact, another character in my book, one of the Isaac brothers, his son just called me and said he found a tape on YouTube that some high school kid had taped like 10, 12 years before he passed away. He had never talked about the war to his own sons, and some high school kid interviewed him and the tape was on. So people did not talk about it. They didn't. And a lot of that research I pried into people. And of course, as you get the next generation, you get pieces. But I did as much research as I could through the people. But they tended to talk about it more later on than I think they did early on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, after I finished your book, the next book on my pile of books, I read a book all the time, is currently the Wingmen, with the story of John Glenn and Ted Williams, and their friendship and how that evolved.
Yeah.
And I'm getting near the end of that one, but two very, very different guys coming from very different places, and how they have managed to bond. And I think both of them also, Williams in particular, kind of loosened up a little bit over time.
Well, it's funny you talk about two different guys, two things, and that was a big thing with my father. The two friends he idolized that are the main characters in my book, Michael Puppy Moses and Michael Nemo Salim, were very different as best friends. One was handsome and had the beautiful girlfriend who also, struggles with leukemia in the 1940s, but as he goes to war. and the other one was shy and a deep thinker who spoke in full sentences. And so I found that interesting, that my dad talked about these characters who go off, but they had different personalities, but they were best friends in this tiny little village. And they had different goals. One wanted to be a doctor, and the other wanted to be, didn't know really what he wanted, but he knew he thought about the meaning of life all the time. So
again, those are part of the strings throughout the book that I found interesting, and also as you are caretaker for your father, and the role of your daughter, who I found that fascinating. I mean, how close she had bonded to him. I mean, his frailties and incapacities did not deter her from loving him to pieces.
It's funny. My mom, passed away, and my dad was all alone, so he moved down here with us. And he was a kind of guy who could drive into the academy, he'd walk around the academy, he'd sit up in the press box for practice, he'd come in with the coaches on Sunday. And my daughter at that time was 6 months old. As I said, we became parents very late in life. And, he went downhill. And my wife said to me, well, we can't just kick him out now because his health is gone. This little girl has grown up with him. She thinks he's her brother. So they were bonded. They were playmates. They were brother and sister. Even though one was 87, one was 4 at the end of the book, that's their life together. They were in this house together. I mean, and so that was their life. And, we came to that point where what do we do now? And, they bonded as brother and sister. And they were close. That was her playmate. That was her brother, her playmate,
Yeah, like I say, but I mean, it was just and how the interaction within your own household and the stress when you've got when you're a caregiver. I mean, a very, very good friend of mine growing up, who's now deceased, passed away with early Alzheimer's about 10 years ago or so, and his wife and daughter were his primary caregivers. And so there's a little bit of for me, something I could associate with what you're writing about. And how difficult it was. I mean, this is not easy. And you mentioned the chores for you. I think burden's not too strong of a word. Your wife took on a lot. And it's not easy. I mean, there's a time I'm sure there must have been exasperation and why me?
No, I mean, it isn't. I do try to come off as how difficult it is, but I will also say this: caregiving has many levels, and everybody does more than they think they can do. If you ever told me 10 years ago I was going to do this, I would say, "There's no way I can't do this." But suddenly, when push comes to shove and you have no other choice, all of us are capable of doing a lot more than we think for our loved ones. From the outside we say, I could never do that. My sister took care of my father or whatever. But when you have no choice, all of us, all human beings through love are capable of doing much more than they think if they are faced with that situation. So that's kind of what we were. Okay, we did this. It was tough, it was hard at the time. I think back and say, how'd we do it? I can't believe we did that. But I think a lot of people who read this and say, I couldn't do that, could do it if they were faced with it. And
well, I think that you're right, that people will step up and you do what you have to do.
Yeah.
You may not plan on it, but human spirit is strong.
Yep.
So I concur with you there. Interestingly, especially on the academy side, when you're writing, finding so many familiar names of people that I know from some from childhood, just some from my own stations in life, where as a local government official, I had a chance to meet some of the hierarchy at the academy at different times. Where Admiral Stowes and Rendon and Burho. I've had the privilege of having them come in and interview, but it's an honor to have the admirals come in and carve out some time for you. I mean, I know they're exceptionally busy, so that was good stuff. And like I say, many of the coaches and a guy like Bob Bona, who I've known since Little League, that's a long time ago.
Well, you're right, and I tried to weave in it, and so that I tried to go from being the football coach at the academy, dealing with the academy stuff, coming home to the situation at home, and then at night my father reflecting on his World War II childhood, so we go back and forth. But I struggled to find I wrote to 100 literary agents, no one would even read it, no one, and finally Admiral Stowe's, who had retired, Admiral Sandra Stowe's, took a copy and she said, "I'll help you, I like the book." So she helped me a great deal. This was her in retirement that helped me. But it's funny, you do know the same people, and Vicki is part of the book, and
well, you mentioned Mike DeMauro at the day.
Yeah.
I don't remember seeing Rick Costa's name, but you mentioned him before he came on the air, and I do know Rick. I mean, he's a neighbor over on Lowell Boulevard.
Well, again, the book only revolves really around one football game. It really isn't much about football, but it's the 214 Merchant Marine game. And the week before that, Mike wrote a column which said maybe the academy should drop football. and we ended up winning that game the next week. But talking about the size difference. So these people are, when you're a football coach, the people who write about football are part of your life. That's as much as your life as anything. So.
Yeah. Well, and that's a challenge. I mean, as the coach, how do you recruit to the academy? I mean, you've got exceptionally high academic standards, so you're not going to get it cuts a lot of players out. And then you have the military component where a lot of folks aren't interested in that. And, how are you going to get high achievers academically who are going to want to take on the military and know that they're going to have 5 years of this when they graduate, if not more, but at least 5, and then play football with all the rigors that goes along with it, and you outline that pretty clearly, so especially for the younger guys.
Yeah, it's a challenge to play a sport. I mean, you talked about recruiting. Yeah, you have to find the high-level academic person that has some interest in looking at the academy. You can't force them to go to an academy or talk them into it. They have to have some interest in serving in the military. They have to have some interest in what the Coast Guard does. And then you have to lead them there and show them all the good things. I said this, I think, before. Every kid who ever came, and we recruited a lot. We went out and recruited. They recruit now for football. You recruit, but you don't get to pick who you want, but you try to get them there and get them through the admissions process. And they have to meet the standard. But, a person has to come to the Coast Guard Academy and say to themselves, I'm a little bit different than even my best friend. I know I'm different I have something inside me that says I want to do this. I want to serve the nation. I want to be an officer. I want to be part of the United States Coast Guard. So you have to find that person who's got something inside of them. I don't think you put it in. I think it's in there, and you try to grow it as you're recruiting them.
Well, I think that's a fine assessment that you're getting the top of the top coming out of high school.
Yeah.
I mean, and you're getting them from all over the country. I mean, it's not like you're getting them all from Alabama or Montana. I mean, every state should be, I believe, would be represented. Maybe not on the football team, but they're represented at the academy. And that's one thing too, in terms of fielding teams of all sports, is what's we were discussing Otto Graham before coming on the air, and when he was there, it was all men.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the student body totals have changed radically since then. My point being is that you've got a significant amount of women. They don't play football, so your pool is smaller.
Well, the numbers always were a challenge for us, and they probably always will be, as you go in and out years and stuff. And it's a sport of numbers, and and it's a challenge. It's a sport of injuries, and so you got to have, and it's not a sport at the academy where freshmen can play. You can't go through 6 weeks of swab summer and lose your muscle mass and lose your weight and play. So that also becomes a factor. Your freshmen are really subtracted from the playing part of the game. I mean, they make it through practice and they get through, but it's hard for them to compete. So the numbers are a challenge, but I always, you'd say two things when I was coaching. I always say you want to shoot for a NCAA playoff bid, but at the same time you're using the sport, the wonderfulness of sport, any sport, but in this case football, to make people better officers. So I always kept that as a forefront. It is about making people better officers. So you might fail and not get to the NCAA playoffs, but you really did succeed if you succeeded in using the sport to make people better officers.
Yeah. Well, I felt as a high school player that football taught many of life's lessons that not necessarily becoming an officer, but becoming a better human being, learning about teamwork and authority and getting along and all sorts of I think, life lessons. I mean, you're not going to win every game and you're not going to necessarily like every coach or your teammate, but you got to learn to put some of the stuff aside for the good of the whole.
I think you're 100% right. If you look at, my daughter, who's 4.5 throughout this book, is now in the 8th grade playing middle school basketball. But for her to get on a bus, for her to face the challenges, for her to try to learn teamwork, for her to do the things, and she's excited. I can take her to a Coast Guard game, to the men's and women's basketball games, which we do, and she'll ask me questions about the strategy. So sport does teach us so very much, and it is a great avenue for people to take up leadership roles. My last year or two, and I had some bright kids, I started thinking that in some of the early, not crunch time, but in some of the meetings, I would have the seniors run the offensive line meetings for the younger guys. And I thought to myself, you probably could have done this at any college in America, but you look at it at Coast Guard and say, I bet you these guys could run this X and O part of the meeting. And they did. I mean, I'm sitting there watching it, but so it does teach some other leadership things behind the scenes, not just what occurs on the field, but what occurs off the field.
Yeah. If you had to do it over again, would you be a football coach?
I would not change a thing. I'm not sure I could have lasted as a head football coach anywhere but the United States Coast Guard Academy. I think I fit there. I think it fit for me. I think it worked for me. I was lucky, as in Division III, you still coach a position, so I was still the offensive line coach, which I loved. The blocking aspect and picking up the blitzes and all that stuff.
Sure.
But I would not do a thing over again, no. And on the side court, I get nervous because I'm trying to push a book or a little bit, but I've read the book, it's already done, the biggest challenge, so I should smile. So I don't think I could change much. What would you change? In terms of that aspect of it, we certainly all, look back at the tragedies of life and say, I wish certain tragedies didn't happen. But in terms of coaching at the Coast Guard Academy, no, I don't. I tell you, it was the greatest job in the world.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, because I have a number of high school coaches come through here, and we discuss. Some of these young kids in high school that are the stars and the studs, or whatever sport they may be playing, is that D3 is pretty good quality competition at whatever sport you're playing at, and I think sometimes the young kids don't fully understand that. The kids who are playing football or basketball or whatever sport it is at the Coast Guard, they're good players. And or at Conn College or Mitchell College. I enjoy watching our local schools compete against each other, I might add.
I think you're 100% right. I think it's really, and maybe now so, even more so, almost to their junior year where every kid still thinks they're going to Notre Dame or Ohio State, to play a sport, any men's and women's basketball. I see all these. I'll bet you every young lady from my daughter on up thinks they're going to go play for Gino Auriemma at UConn right now. But I think you get to be about probably your junior year of college when you realize, junior year of high school, where you say, guess what, I'm not going. And like you said, Division III is extremely competitive in all sports. It's good football.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, I met you at a Coast Guard basketball game. That's where I was introduced to you by Mr. Bono. And I don't know, a couple of months ago, I guess, and which I thought was fascinating. And the conference that Coast Guard plays, I mean, they've had, Babson has won a national title recently. And over at Con, where Amherst has won a national title. And this is, you got good teams, good players. I mean, you just don't walk on from the schoolyard of downtown New London and become a star at D3.
No, and D3 is dominant in many sports in the Northeast. Soccer, basketball, football, men's and women's, it doesn't matter. It seems to be much more dominant in the Northeast, I think, the number of colleges. So it gets that way,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, it's good. It's good. Not everybody can play for Notre Dame, you know.
No, they can't. But I saw last week. Matter of fact, I took last week off here, specifically so I could watch Glenn Miller's squad play Mitchell with St. Joseph's from West Hartford. That's a relatively new program, but between he and Jim Calhoun, they've whipped together a nationally prominent program pretty quick.
Yeah.
And 'cause I wanted to see because he did a great job when he was at Conn College. He had a team that went to the Final Four and turned around a Moribund Brown program. And what's he doing here at St. Back in D3? And he had they smoked Mitchell. It was just. Wow, these guys are terrific.
Yeah. There's a lot of good athletes out there and a lot of good coaches at all levels. You can see great coaches just as good as, I mean, we put the Super Bowl on right now and we say, geez, they make the same mistakes as everybody else makes, the levels. So I think that you see great coaching from high school on up in all sports. You can see some great coaching.
Some of the big questions last weekend is why not take the points?
Well, I
coached
at Coast Guard, so we always took the points. You know, we never passed up points. So.
But that's what I say. I mean, but it's fun to watch the competition. I mean, I love it. In the fall. I try to go to a college football game every Saturday, someplace, and I just enjoy watching the competition. I enjoy the Ivy League and D3 and West Point.
Yeah.
I mean, once in a blue moon, maybe go to Rutgers or something, or BC, but those aren't my primary targets.
Yeah. Actually, my wife and daughter and I went to the Army-Navy game in Gillette this year, and that was a huge family experience.
Had you been before?
I went to one Army-Navy game years ago when I coached at West Point Prep, the one that was at the Meadowlands, actually. I think it was in '87 or '88, I can't remember. And I went to that game. I'm friends with John Luce, who's the assistant head coach at West Point, and it's his charity that a lot of the proceeds of this book go to, Lauren's First in Goal for pediatric cancer. But he's the assistant head coach at West Point and runs that charity. And so he helped us out. We went to that game. I sat with near Tom Atkin, Admiral Atkin, retired admiral from the Coast Guard, and I apologize, another Coast Guard player, and John's sister-in-law, Patrice, who's an author. So I had a wonderful time just in the stands. But the game itself, is just beyond comprehension. If you had to attend one sporting event in person, I would have to say you'd have to go to the Army-Navy football game. It's just really beyond all other sporting events in person.
Yeah, and I've been to a number of them. The first one was in 2002 at the Meadowlands, and it was arguably the coldest game I'd ever been to. It was brutal. And that was the beginning of that long run that Navy had. Yeah. So I had to keep going every year until Army won. So I forget how many years it was, but it was a long, long run.
It was 20 years. And I think in the book we beat them in 14, but we hadn't beat them in 3 or 4 years. And it kills you when you haven't beaten your arch rival in 3 years. And I don't know how they did that stretch of 20 years. I looked it up the other day. I mean, that's that's 2 decades in the biggest rivalry, and you see it in rivalries in Michigan. You know, you see it in all these things.
Yeah.
So.
But I enjoy the pomp and circumstance. I love watching the cadets and the midshipmen march on the field, and the flyovers and the parachuters. I mean, the whole kit and caboodle, and a football game.
Yeah,
It's just can't get any better than that.
no, it's an unbelievable experience. It really is. It's different than anything I've been to in any other sporting event.
Yeah.
So.
And there's been occasion where I've had been at those games where the president's been there. It adds a little bit of extra. You know, kind of a little extra juice to the affair. You know, to have the President of the United States at the event, and which is kind of neat.
Yeah. When you see a guy jump out of a plane, first of all, I thought it was a plane landing at Boston Logan's Airport. That's how high up it was. And this guy jumped out, and he had a flag. It was probably the size of this building tied to his ankle. And I just have never seen anything like that. And he landed, you know, on a parachute with a flag, his biggest flag I've ever seen, right on the 50-yard line.
Yeah.
So,
Very talented, those.
it's
those
unbelievable. It's
paratroopers.
unbelievable. God bless those people who serve our country. You know.
Fantastic. So, I'm trying to think here if with this exercise, and you mentioned just a moment ago, I think we need to highlight that you're not profiting from this book. You know, whatever is earned is going to go to research or charity. Is that correct?
Well, I'm anything that I would get from my author's thing. Let's say that I sold at the Coast Guard Academy, I give them 100% of that. And then I work a percentage. I don't want to mislead anyone.
Yeah.
But anything I personally sell, I give 100% of beyond the cost of the book. So I have an author's cost, you know, whatever it costs me. I don't cut out travel or any of that stuff. I don't care about that. Spend my own money. I could care less. But if my author's copy, I get a certain, and I don't even know what it is when I get it. I know what it is. I'll get a royalty thing down the road, and I will give them a percentage of that. But anything I personally sell, they get 100% of what it is. I don't, you know, care. And then I give them a percent of the royalties of the book sold there. So
to a large degree, I mean, we've got a labor of love here. I mean, this is really, I mean, this, you're not looking to become, you know, Rowling or Wolf, or you're.
Well, I disagree with that. I am looking to become them. I do want to become a famous writer, and I do want to.
Well, in that case, I stand corrected. I humbly apologize.
No, I do want as many people to read this book. I want, you know, I get calls from people I haven't seen in years, and they read the book, and I had a wonderful review for it. So I'm like anybody else, just like I was a football coach who wanted to win games. I'm a guy who wrote a book, and I want a lot of people to read it and fall in love with it. If they do, wonderful. But in terms of, and I'm not to that level by any stretch of the imagination. So it's a labor of love. You're right. So I'm not concerned about making, you know, money off of this book.
Did you find writing a pleasant exercise? Was it exasperating? I mean, you had folks reading your work and critiquing it, and you mentioned having a rather significant portion of the book, your original writing, taken out because of space considerations, I guess.
Yeah. First of all, I do enjoy the part of writing. It certainly was easier when I wasn't a football coach, but I do enjoy it very much. It's a small company. They did a phenomenal job with this cover. We spent 2 hours on a Zoom call. I had no idea. All of a sudden, they sent me an email with this cover. It wasn't anything we talked about. I don't know where they got it, how their graphic designers did it. And they did have professional editors. I had to cut from my original manuscript. They said for me to sign the contract, I had to cut 9,000 words out and then work with them for another 10,000 words. But they didn't, I was worried what they were going to cut out. They didn't cut anything out that I really cared about. They kept all in. They cut a little bit extra of the game leading up to the Merchant Marine game. They cut a little bit extra of the football game afterwards. So they cut a lot of the excess football out, kept in the World War II characters, kept in all the relationships, kept in the caregiving, kept in the Merchant Marine game, the one game. So we zeroed it back to one game. So, you know, and they did a wonderful job editing, and every time I argued, I wouldn't say argue, but every time they do it now where they edit in front of you with the Adobe stickers and the red lines and everything, and every time the editor would send, the main editor of the publisher, Kohler Books, would send me something, I would kind of argue a little bit at first, but then they would always prove me wrong and them right, but that's what they do for a living. So to say it's a labor, I enjoy that aspect of it. It's a small company, so I have to do a lot of the marketing myself. That part I'm not really in love with. It's not my personality to be
You're
out
doing
there.
a great job tonight, I'll say that.
Well, you know, but I'm not, you know, I mean, I've had to force myself to do the social media thing and all that stuff. So that part, they're a small company. They did a fabulous job editing, fabulous job with the cover, fabulous job coaching and teaching me. But they don't have, you have to do your own marketing and pushing of the book. So.
Now, did this book require a significant amount of research, or were you operating from memory?
No, I did tons of research, tons. And in fact, for many people, the same thing comes through, is that the War Records Department in St. Louis, Missouri, which had a massive fire in 1973, burned so many World War II records. So I did lots and lots of research, you know. In fact, I just recently, here it is, after 7, 8 years of research, I even had a company do some research for me, paid a company to do some. They couldn't dig up much because of the war records fire. I did a lot of research. I just uncovered recently a couple extra pictures that I'm holding back regarding some of the people, the main characters of my book that I just received maybe 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
So, no, I did a lot of research, a lot. And you just try to align your facts as best I could, you know, with all the things. And of course, I was lucky. I had one survivor of this group, Gus Isaacs, George Gus Isaacs, is still alive at 100 and still I went to his 100-year birthday party this summer in Myers, and he could still tell me a lot of things. And again, you know, I taped him, I videotaped him, and then if he gives you dates and times, you can go back and look. And his stories of this village matched with my father's. They grew up together, but the little things matched up, you know, and so that part of it, the personality. But I did have to, you know, I did have to recreate some of the conversations. You don't really know what people talked about when they were 15 years old or 14 years old, and they're, those things. So I did recreate those aspects, trying to recreate relationships as they grew up, you know, so.
Well, you know, in this general region here in southeastern Connecticut, I think that there are so many, it's a sports area. There's a lot of folks that enjoy athletics, and with the schools that we've got, I sincerely hope that you're going to get a big boom from guys like Roger Bidwell, or you mentioned Pete Giannakis, Mr. G's, and I'm going to be on Lee Elsey's radio program tomorrow morning, and I'll give a little plug for the book, and I'll maybe see if we can get you on Lee's program, because I think, and he played minor league baseball, he got to AAA, so he's an athlete in his own right, professionally, and I think that he would find this to be interesting for his program.
Oh, I hope so. I'll take any help I can get.
And just your effervescent personality here, I think that we got to get you out and about.
Well, we're trying. I was at Bank Square Books for a wonderful Saturday signing recently, and again, Rick Coster did a tremendous job in the New London Day, and I've got a couple of national podcasts that have been taped that are coming up. They won't be out probably till March, but you just keep plugging along. It's a competitive. And again, one thing my publisher said to me, he says, you can do all the things you want, you can do everything you want. He said, 85% of this is going to circle back to the quality of your book. And that is what will carry you eventually. So I'm just hoping that word gets out and people just read it, and just like it.
And I would hope that there's going to be good networking within the academy and the coaching fraternity of folks that you have worked with and against. Maybe some of your folks, the coaches that were on the other sideline, that taking interest and see what made this guy tick.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. You want to go to as many places as you can and try to get people to read a book, and hopefully, again, it's not just
many
about
ball players as well.
Yeah, it's not necessarily, though. There's probably less football than anything, and you said labor of love. It was probably easier for me to do the research and writing about the World War II aspects, and listening to my father, have flashbacks experiences, what he talked about. I don't want to say he had dementia, but he did say some odd things at night and worry about his own mortality or his own meaning of life, as what happens when a person.
Is there a significant community of family and friends in Myers still there, or is that dissipated?
That's a tremendous question, and that is about. There is a few still there. My cousin, I talked to one last night. There are a few still there, but they're spread out. But it's almost in a way sad to go back, and because everyone's gone. All those people who inhabited every one of those houses were cousins and second cousins, and that whole village. But time stands still for no one. We all know that, and they have passed on so many people, especially that World War II generation, or even their parents. They've all passed on. There are a few, but sadly, you have to say it's dissipated.
So things change. I mean, in the company store, it was a salt.
International salt. That if a person just wrote to me and said, "How about a guy I hadn't seen in 40 years? If I go to Myers right now, can I walk across that same bridge you talked about? Can I go up that path? Can I go into that church?" Everything is there, but the salt plant was torn down in the early '60s, which makes it a better view of the lake. But pretty much everything. My grandfather's store is not there, but the same road and the houses are there and everything. But so, yeah, it's pretty much still there. But the people, buildings last. People fade away.
Now has the neighborhood changed where you're a waterfront, lakefront community, where with a salt plant and it's commercial? Is it now more touristy and higher end?
I don't know.
Has real estate now become?
Let me tell you something. So you've got this hill overlooking a salt plant. The International Salt Plant brought all these immigrant people in, and I think they gave them a piece of paper and said, if you live here for 25 years, you own this house. So all of a sudden, they tear away this salt plant in the 60s, and then these people get old, and they have this house that now overlooks Cayuga Lake. They're all built in 1920. They all had outdoor toilets when they first were there. They all have 2 bedrooms, right? That's it, for 5 kids and a set of parents. But now these houses are overlooking Cayuga Lake. And so your point is well taken. Suddenly everyone inherited, as in the 80s and 90s. But then as they passed on, their children got them, and it went. So some of them have kept them. My cousin, one of the characters' nephews, lives in the same house Gus Isaacs lived in, and he lives over on the other. So, yeah, that point is well taken.
Yeah, I mean, my mother grew up in Piermont, New York, just over the Tappan Zee Bridge, in Nyack, and the image that she left with me of that area when she was growing up it was commercial, and it was poor. They were going through the Depression.
Yeah,
and it was not a box of chocolates down there, and now it's. You're real estate rich if you overlooking the Hudson, and it's just it's different. It's not the immigrant neighborhood.
I know it. It's funny. When I was a child, I remember my relatives showed me they'd make their own parsley. You know what I mean? And you think, hi, they spent all that time to grow it and nurture it and then dry it out, and now you go to the store and there it is on a shelf, and so. It changes. Things change,
So, I mean, I just, like I said, it's part of and we were talking again before coming on the air. I mean, I grew up in London, and as did my father and my uncle. And although my family's of more Norwegian background, London has a rich history of Italians and the Ford area and Shaw Street and other parts of the community, and how, again, people kind of stayed in their neighborhoods during that period. They just didn't have the transportation or the resources to just, well, let's go to Europe for a week, or let's take a show in New York City. That wasn't part of the program.
Yeah.
You worked and you provided for your family, and
that's what, you know, it was for this little village. I didn't realize it at first, but this little village, it was about jobs and working and coming to this country and working. But I also didn't realize how much, you know, they were Syrian Orthodox, the Christianity part. I didn't realize how much the freedom of religion was also what they wanted. You know, that church centered their town, and it was a big thing for them to have their own, which International Salt built. They put the church in and said, here, all you people are from this area. And so it was a whole self-centered thing. And you know, they didn't leave the little community, you know.
It's fantastic. We're running down to our last couple of seconds here. Is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience that perhaps we haven't touched on here?
No, it's a book about family caregiving, coaching college football, and the shortened lives of World War II, and how this little village was affected. And my father retells it as he's dying, and I'm trying to win a football game with a 4.5-year-old daughter. And so I hope I brought out the best in me and the best in all the people I wrote about.
Well, I hope that you sell a boatload of these things. It's a terrific read, and you're a terrific guy, and I want to thank you for spending an hour here on City Focus. And folks, we'll see you again next week. Good night.